Happy Thursday, everyone. Today is April 13th, and we are happy you've joined us today to talk through some topical insights and use cases related to current impacts of the cybersecurity and technology industry. I'm Melissa Smith, Head of Strategic Technology Partnerships in the Mandiant ecosystem at Mandiant, proud to say now part of Google Cloud. Today, I'm honored to be the host of today's panel discussion alongside, pardon the nerves, some of the most notable and esteemed minds who I'm happy to call my friends and partners of Mandiant. We'll all add our own flair and color on today's topics. A few friendly reminders: we want to keep this interactive and informative, and most importantly, informal. Please use the question and answer function, and the wonderful Mariah of Stairwell will help me monitor those at the end of the panel highlights for discussion. This recording will be available on demand, and we do hope that you will join us in future thought leadership discussions throughout the remainder of the year. Without further ado, let's begin introductions. Greg, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm so grateful to be invited. Thank you, Mel. My name is Greg Bell. I'm co-founder and also Chief Strategy Officer at Corelight. Corelight is a very mission-oriented network security company, and we're also the fastest growing in our category. We're emphatically an open source company as well. We are commercializing software that was created by my co-founder, Vern Paxson. It's called Zeek, and Zeek has become quite popular. In fact, it's actually now a component of Windows Defender, so it's possible that it's running on your laptop as you're watching this. My own background is not in the startup world. Actually, it's in federal service. I spent most of my career at the US Department of Energy, where I oversaw, at the end of my career, the global mission network for the department, a high-performance network interconnecting the nuclear weapons complex and the national lab complex. So very different risk models, very different missions represented by that. And I'll add that Corelight is a close partner of Mandiant, where we have a lot of cultural and technical alignment. That's it.
So my name is Chet Nambudri. I am the Senior Vice President and lead for our business development and alliances at Nozomi Networks. I'm very pleased to have been a partner and be a partner with Mandiant for about 5 years, actually over 5 years now. What Nozomi does is we bring cybersecurity and analytics to the OT and IoT realms. We minimize risk and maximize resilience through OT and IoT network visibility and dynamic threat and anomaly detection. And we do that in concert in the case of Mandiant and the ecosystem of partners here by presenting IT/OT converged analytics that have a bend and tilt towards the OT side of things and IoT side of things. So my background is 100% for the last 30 years in the industrial space. I like to call myself a knuckle dragger. I use that very familiarly, and I come from a background of controls and automation, starting out in industry, like I said, about 30 years ago, and happy to have been with Nozomi Networks now for over 6 years.
I'm Lucas Chumley. I'm the Senior Manager for Technology Partner Solution Architecture here at SentinelOne. I've been at SentinelOne now for 4 years. I worked and helped start our incident response program, incident response partner program, which is where I have cultivated a relationship with Mandiant over the last 2 years. I have 13 years background in forensics and cybersecurity, and have contributed to a lot of the incident response capabilities of the SentinelOne platform.
And I'm Paul Caiazzo. I'm Chief Growth Officer at SnapAttack. And if you're not familiar with us, we are an early stage startup that's focused on helping organizations be more proactive with respect to cybersecurity. We do that by bringing together threat intelligence, bridging the gaps between red and blue teams, including adversary simulation and detection as code, with the goals of accelerating threat hunts, optimizing security operations center detection outcomes, and powering continuous purple teaming. And while my focus here is on business development, I am a practitioner by trade with about 23 years of experience, mostly on the blue team side. I've led large security operations centers, done a lot of consulting for government organizations, I've founded a couple of MSSPs, and I'm excited to talk with the group today. So thanks for having me.
I'm Shel Sharma, VP of Products at Stairwell. We are an intelligence-based continuous threat detection and response platform. My focus is on product strategic direction and also tactical day-to-day decision-making on what to build. Been here about 1.5 years and joined from Salesforce, where I would have been a customer of the product I'm building. I spent about 3 years there working on detection and response, rolling out EDRs, creating security data lakes, and things like that. Before that, about 15 years, mostly in security industry, building products. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Shell, and thanks everybody for the robust introductions. And, coming from a Mandiant perspective, we are honored and humbled to partner with you all. We could not have gone through this journey the past 2 years since I've been here as being part of FireEye, divesting and being Mandiant standalone, and now part of Google Cloud without you all. And as a Mandiant use case perspective, what's near and dear to our heart is, obviously those topical things related to investigation and breaches related to incident response. And Greg, I'll pass this over to you. Probably one of the key places that we came together as an alliance and newly formed partner was back in 2020 with the SolarWinds incident. So would love to hear what you and Chet are seeing from two different kind of technology standpoints on the gaps within incident response.
Yeah, I'm naturally an optimist, but sometimes when I talk to prospective customers, I feel like it's nothing but gaps. It's very hard work. And it can be maybe instructive to step back and imagine how do we want the work of incident response to actually be? I think we want it to be fun, right? We want responders to be effective and efficient and to have great tools and to learn constantly, to drop into a flow state, and to turn their learning into improved processes and tooling around them. But in reality, when we look around us, a lot of responders are demoralized and they're overworked. And of course, we see them drowning in false positives. And I know that all of us on the panel has some perspective on how to improve the situation, which desperately needs improvement. And I think none of us has the silver bullet. Our impact as a company is usually felt in the form of much better underlying evidence for incident response. It's more complete, provides greater coverage, it's more relevant, more consistent, more pivotable, more concise. And we find generally, though, like I said, it's not a silver bullet, better evidence makes all the everyday tasks of incident response, threat hunting, and forensics faster and more satisfying. And we hope ultimately it contributes to just a better work experience. Because we do face a problem of burnout, and we're going to run out of people willing to do this work. It's so critical, but it's very difficult. So I guess I'd begin with that perspective.
Yeah, and complementing that in terms of the gaps, in terms of capabilities, in terms of people availability and the burnout, there's this nagging gap that extends beyond the IT realm into the OT space, where particularly in an IT-OT converged environment, incident response within the OT premise is, is less covered than it is for IoT, right? And so, as I mentioned before, while we initiated our partnership with Mandiant in the managed defense, in their managed defense offering, their managed detection and response capability and assessments, we've progressed that through the years to really complement the Mandiant and our ecosystem of partners, as represented here, with complementary capabilities, the forensic analysis, the incident assessments, and the tools and people that help to make that the forensics and the analytics around how to best respond to an incident, both automated as well as informed in terms of what we're seeing on the OT side of things. So we do see that, and again, it's as Greg mentioned earlier, it's not an easy problem, as I might have just presented that we're looking to solve, but it is it's one that we're very focused on, and our partnerships with companies such as represented on this panel are extremely important. Cybersecurity is a team sport, and this is all about having a defense response that is team oriented. And in the case of Nozomi, bringing together that IT-OT converged view.
Yeah, no, I love that from both of you, and thanks, guys. And I'm going to pick on Lucas here. And yes, I do have the face for radio since I'm not on camera like the rest of you. But Lucas, you brought up something that's near and dear to my heart. Is we started this journey together as Mandiant and SentinelOne about 2 years ago, right? And what we found was the need and desire to give our incident responders expanded capabilities outside of what we were reliant for in the past, right? Because tools and technology, especially to respond when the bad things happened with tools like EDR are super important. And Lucas, the value of us coming together and the unification just from an industry perspective has been hugely beneficial to Mandiant and now Google Cloud. But your insights, right, for building that incident response program and practice, kind of dovetail into what Chet and Greg both said.
Yeah, absolutely. Working with incident responders really showed that there were, as was mentioned, there's no silver bullet. There's a whole lot of things that need worked on and need helped. So things like using AI where it's appropriate to augment staff shortages and things like that, and then letting the actual people that are sitting in the seats already bring the workflows that matter to them the way they expect them to actually work, and being able to automate those is really been a big deal. And Mandiant's helped a lot with pushing that stuff and making sure that we're amongst the best of breed.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And Mandiant is notable, and I like to say that I bring everybody along for the ride with us, but wouldn't go without saying that we need the big logos and the small logos there. Like Shell, you've got a perspective on this, and Paul too, as being a practitioner. Like incident response is probably something we could have a whole nother hour discussion on, but just to round things out here, go ahead.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think you're muted.
There you
Thank
go.
you for the reminder.
Mm.
Yeah, I was saying incident response is a really interesting topic to me. And one of the reasons I joined Stairwell is when I was chatting with our founder and CEO, and he walked me through the process of how somebody would deal with things like sunburst that you brought up previously, and how easy it would be. And having lived through that in my previous job, responding to sunburst and spending weeks and weeks of gathering data, analyzing it, it seemed like this is something I wanted to come here and build, and that's why I came here. In terms of my view on incident response, I think there is a deficit of people who can do a good job of response, and at the same time, there's a lack of right tools and data that they can operate on. A lot of enterprise level incident response that I see is focused on what I would say treating the symptoms one alert at a time. So you see an alert pop up, you go clean up the machine, take care of it, shows up somewhere else, do the same thing. What organizations fail to see is the campaigns or the blast radius of the entire attack, because they are just treating it one symptom at a time. Instead of looking at each alert, we need to provide them tools, and we need to empower them to see the entire picture so they can approve the entire campaign and not deal with the individual symptoms of incidents. Back to you.
And I guess, from my perspective, I'll chime in. I think, Greg, what you said earlier around better evidence is absolutely true as it relates to incident response. Cybersecurity is hard, right? I think there's a few disciplines within the universe of cybersecurity that are hardest, and incident response is probably right up there at the top. Not just because of the expertise it requires to analyze, the data sets that you've got to work with, it's also pretty darn stressful. And if you think about it from the victim's perspective, you're there trying to help that organization on perhaps their worst professional day. And so there's a lot of reward to be found within that. But it does require a heck of a lot of expertise around how to detect evil. And I think that only really comes through, seat time and the muscle memory of kind of intuition that you build through running many incidents and understanding, Greg, to your point, what is the right evidence? What is the best set of telemetry required for me to enable, that finding the trail of breadcrumbs back to its origin. But keeping in mind that entire time you're there helping a victim of a crime, I've always found to be how to center myself and the team around solving the problem for the customer. There continues to be a skill set gap within this discipline, and even within it, there's multiple different ways to look at incident response. You've got your hard drive analysis, network analysis, you've got endpoint analysis, all that sort of stuff, memory analysis, et cetera. And a good incident responder has experience across all of those things, but they're few and far between. So they've got to be augmented with the right set of tools, the right set of technologies, preferably in an integrated workflow. And again, muscle memory and C time really helps with achieving the outcome quickly with respect to that, because you're trying to contain the incident as quickly as possible. And the more that we can do to accelerate that for the responders worldwide is of benefit. So that's, I think, where the notion of this conversation about better together really shines, because it takes so many different moving parts to come together to effectively get through an incident that it really shouldn't be overlooked.
That's actually great, Paul. I was thinking the same thing. The big deal here is going to be the fact that the right set of tools is what's always going to be necessary. Every incident response is just as unique as the people involved in it, and the right set of tools should be left to the experts that are handling it and in determining what those are. And every set of tools should work together. And I think that's one thing that we've made huge strides on as an industry in the last few years.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, we hear a lot of buzzwordy and kind of it's flooded in our social media on LinkedIn, especially is, talent shortage, and what are the tools that we need to enable to kind of have the better together story in those moments of crisis. And, kind of in the last 30 to 60 days, right? Like we've seen some key impacts to our critical infrastructure, whether those are financially related to like the SVB potential collapse, and I use that in air quotes, or, things that we've responded on as Mandiant with 3CX related to supply chain issue. Chet, that is like right in the wheelhouse of Nozomi, right? Like critical infrastructure that impacts and threats directly related to the industrial side of the business that, again, might be under the radar, but have importance to maintaining relevancy to everything in what we do here.
Yeah, to the global economy, and even those incidents that may initiate out of the IT realm that have an impact on OT. We can, a somewhat recent incident with Colonial Pipeline is a great example of where an IT incident, impacted the country's ability to deliver oil, across the eastern shore, and that had global implications, right? And while there was not the incident didn't initiate in the OT sector, just having that an understanding around how the two IT and OT are related, and the impact that can be had from incidents that arise from wherever they may come from. There's a significant impact on not just the country, but can have an impact on the global economy in total. And there was really a wake-up call out of the cyberspace solarium. There were many of these incidents that led to people go back to Stuxnet a long time ago at this point, 13 years ago. But cyberspace solarium really woke up the federal policymakers on really what was forgotten cybersecurity policy issues. And so that wake-up call has found its way into NIST, into CISA. And one of the organizations, the public-private partnership that Nozomi was part of founding, is the OTCC, the OT Cybersecurity Coalition, which again is about better together. It's about having a team-oriented approach to cybersecurity and intelligence, and really around addressing the shortages in terms of workforce talent and capabilities, and education. Aligning with the standards coming out of NIST and CISA, and doing that in a way that brings in all aspects of the public-private partnership, right, from these various federal organizations into the private cybersecurity companies, such as represented on this panel, that have some element that is brought to bear in terms of securing our critical infrastructure. And then, you know, one other objective of the OTCC is really providing that prioritization, right? Continuing to have that front and center in terms of critical infrastructure and, you know, the impact it has on the workings of our global economy.
Yeah, that's great. And I, to call out too, like, from a current administration standpoint to support critical infrastructure with CISA and then the sharing and collaboration with JCDC there, I think, what we're talking about here is all very mission aligned with, kind of the sanctity of private and public partnerships coming together for the big thing. And Greg, you and I share that passion, right? Like we could probably talk for hours about the mission together. But, talking through the critical infrastructure use case and support, and then bringing up like maybe a buzzwordy term, but threat hunting and purple teaming and those types of things. I think you have some great insight on that, and Paul too. I'll pick on you since I love your shirt right now on the purple team use case.
Yeah, you got it. So as it relates to threat hunting, I guess there's, I guess kind of bringing it back to that disciplines which are hard within cybersecurity. Threat hunting is another one. But I definitely have seen more organizations trying to be more proactive about how they address threats rather than waiting for the incident to land. Unfortunately, if you look at some industry statistics, 63%, I think, of cybersecurity spend is spent on response and recovery. And our belief is that really that's because most organizations don't have the opportunity or the maturity to be proactive. It's a challenging thing to do, to go out in search of the weak signals that might represent threats, and then ultimately, again, having the expertise to analyze and synthesize those weak signals into something that warrants escalation. But we're definitely seeing more people focus on that, whereas previously it was really all about the SOC analyst waiting for the alert. And again, it's a very, very different job. I think in our experience, some of the best threat hunters tend to be extremely good at communication and collaboration, because the process of performing a threat hunt requires understanding like what threats are relevant to the organization. And so, solid CTI function is really critical for a threat hunt to be effective. And then typically the threat hunters really need to understand the telemetry that might identify the threat of interest. And so typically that means there's going to be some adversary emulation, or in other words, collaboration with the red team. And sometimes that can be a little bit tricky to do. A lot of organizations don't even have an in-house red team, so that really impairs their ability to do threat hunting. But then ultimately the output of that is effectively a haystack, right? That's what we're trying to get as threat hunters. That haystack might include network telemetry from an NDR like Corelight, or endpoint telemetry from something like Stairwell, or even file-based analysis like what you might get from Stairwell. There's plenty of other tools out there that would support it, but it all starts with that hunt hypothesis, which requires that you understand the business, its sort of risk appetite, its threat profile, the threats that might be relevant to it, et cetera. So all that being said, that sounds like a daunting and challenging task, but there are some platforms, obviously, we are one of them. There are more that are focused on simplifying the process of threat hunting so that it doesn't require so much expertise and so much time and energy spent in the process of developing the hunt packages and things like that. And to just briefly talk about how we do it. So our platform includes the actual true positive attacks that we're trying to hunt for, as well as the detections. And we're able to validate that that detection content works through a process of effectively automated purple teaming within the platform, so that when you basically pick a detection query off the shelf from us, you didn't have to write it. You can trust it. It's going to work whether you're analyzing network data or endpoint data or whatever it is. So trying to lower the bars, I think where we're focused. I know others in the industry are as well. Simplifying these hard jobs is something that I guess the industry is very much focused on. And part of that also kind of speaks back to the community thing, which I think we're going to touch on a little bit later. We're of the mindset that the high tide rises all ships, and so we want to make democratize detection content as much as possible for our customers. I can talk more about purple teaming if you'd like. That's another challenging skill set or discipline, but would love to get the other guys' opinions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I agree with so much of what you said there, especially with the impulse to democratize threat hunting. For a lot of folks, it's an aspirational activity. They don't have time to do it full time. And I love the fact that SnapAttack is working on that problem. And I also love the idea that threat hunters really need to be collaborative people. And that does connect with community. I know we'll talk about it later. It seems like they need to be curious as well. We certainly try to support threat hunters by providing high quality evidence that can be used to answer questions in real time as they occur. Melissa was asking sort of what are the recent developments in threat hunting. I think I candidly would have answered that question differently a month ago, and I might have spoken to progress in the effort to integrate and normalize across data sources. And Lucas made this point as well earlier, just to tell stories that cross traditional boundaries or chasms between EDR and NDR, IoT, identity, intel. I think we are getting a little better at the effort to cross those boundaries. But I do have to confess, lately I'm thinking constantly about the impact of AI on threat hunting and other workflows, and I'm really astonished at the whiplash in thinking and conventional wisdom, because it seemed like before, and this is an exaggeration, but before, all the thinking was around using AI to detect badness, which is a hard problem. And two of my co-founders have written an interesting paper on why that's a hard problem. And now, slight exaggeration, but to a first order true, the recent thinking is about using large language models to augment human functions like threat hunting and incident response too. And I'm curious about reactions to that, because I think there's enormous potential, some obvious pitfalls too. We don't want to naively accept the output of hallucinations, but some really interesting potential to improve efficiency and improve job satisfaction. And I'm certain we're all thinking about it, our teams are all thinking about it, so I thought I'd just put that on the table.
Yeah, I think efficiency is an important one, because I mean, a lot of threat hunting right now is manual, and it's when you're building a team, it's really hard to justify how many people you need to provide adequate coverage across the enterprise, different things that you might want to look at. So, you know, until we can like 10x or even 100x the capacity of hunting experts, it's not going to be a feasible ROI, TCO, justified activity for most organizations. And, you know, we were talking about there being a lack of experts and data and tooling for incident response. It is much, much worse for hunting. A lot of our practices are, you know, hunters are using traditional tools used by detection and response teams. You know, they use their data lakes and SIMs and things like that. So I think that there's a huge gap for solutions to come in here and make them more efficient so they can actually provide full coverage across the enterprise.
Yep. I also think that as Greg pointed out, the way of thinking about AI just a few years ago to you know, kind of find malicious stuff and whatnot, that, you know, that's an area that SentinelOne really, that's how we started, was with that. But in the current age, while we do have to be careful, I think the AI is going to be absolutely pivotal. Otherwise, you're not going to do anything related to threat hunting with the size of the data lakes we're able to produce today. You know, everything that's bringing in data, the collaboration that we all have as vendors, the collaboration that we're all doing with all of this data coming into one place, we're just making that haystack that that Paul talked about earlier bigger. There's more data in one place, and the AI, we're going to have to augment this. It's right now there's a skills gap and a talent shortage and everything else. But at the end of the day, even if we filled all of those positions and everything, there's still not going to be enough people. There's not enough people to stop this. We're producing too much data per person per capita. The AI is going to be pivotal. We do have to be careful, but I think it would be silly to say that there's any way to ignore it.
I would definitely agree with that. I will say, though, so we've done some testing with large language models to see whether or not you can just simply ask it to spit out a query that would be relevant to name a threat actor or something like that. And the issue that we've observed is that they're frequently confidently incorrect. And what I mean by that is they'll give you the wrong answer confidently, and it would still require an expert to say, that's actually not going to work without some additional tweaks. That's not to say they're not going to get there, right? I think with larger training data sets, it's probably going to change the picture quite dramatically. But today, I think it'd be wrong-headed to rely solely on it, but it's certainly a good way to augment. And a notion that a couple of you guys brought up was capacity. And in most of the security organizations that either I've ever worked or customers that we've got, the threat hunter tends to be sort of like the tier 4 security analyst that when they find time outside of the backlog of alerts, they go and do some proactive threat hunting. But unfortunately, that's sort of doomed to fail because they never accomplish clearing out the alert backlog. So to me, that's sort of, you got to start with that. Like unless we completely denote a person's entire job function is to do nothing but threat hunting, most organizations don't have the budget luxury to allow that. And we've got to make the SOC job easier by producing higher quality detection content that reduces the alert fatigue that I think, Greg, you mentioned earlier. So that's, I think, where a lot of like the AI stuff, Lucas, that you're talking about can help with respect to producing higher fidelity alerts that are maybe more reactive in nature to known threats. But when, at least again, in our experience at this date, using the large language models to support threat hunting is sort of fraught, but still it's been interesting to test for sure.
Yeah, and even if you started just a little bit vaguer, like more vague, I guess, you could come out with some pretty amazing results, right? Just being able to, as a threat hunter, you know what you're looking for if you've done your mapping, your behavioral mapping and everything. If you're looking at all of this and trying to figure out, you could be trying to figure out what comes next. Where do I have this data? If it's all in one place, then which data sets should I be looking at? And that kind of thing. And just narrowing down and getting more of that hay out of the stack. I think that would probably be the first step. It's always got to be baby steps.
Sure, I'd agree with that. And, again, not to be too kind of infomercially, but that's sort of where we focus on identifying the true positive telemetry that we know is going to work, which will help you reduce some of that haystack size.
Yeah, so I'll comment here because Nozomi Networks was really founded on AI and machine learning and using that signal to noise in terms of identifying anomalies, both from a cyber perspective in terms of threats that may be detected and causing problems, as well as on an operational front where we see anomalies that are operationally occurring as we observe the telemetry that's coming from the various equipment that's involved in making stuff and producing power and so on. So, and we see just more and more of how AI can be used to augment and automate in a way and inform, in a way that does highlight, the stronger signals, right? And, to your point about heuristic identification or heuristic, querying and how there's a false sense of confidence. I've seen, I think we've all seen that in ChatGPT. And I think that's one that we all have to be wary of as it relates particularly to, kind of using that approach when with threat hunting, with, the forensic analysis and so on, but particularly on the OT side of things. So yeah, a lot of caution goes with the more, the greater use of AI, but I definitely see AI and machine learning, continuing to be a strong element of cybersecurity and monitoring and analytics that are associated therein.
Yeah, Shalon, I'd love to hear from you, right? Like we've said a lot of big things here, again, that could be topics for another hour and then some, and some blogs and research. But, Shell, you said you would be a customer of your product. And I think, holistically from all the things we've talked about, incident response, critical infrastructure support, and now threat hunting, how do you kind of conceptualize what you're working on to kind of mitigate threat hunting? Because I can think about, earlier in 2022, when I first met you and you were building product at Stairwell, your enablement of Mandiant threat hunting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I agree with everybody. AI and ML is going to be a cornerstone of a lot of, how we increase output of threat hunters, how do we make jobs easier for them. But I think there's a lot of just low-hanging fruit that needs to be, because a lot of these solutions have not been targeted at threat hunters. Right? They tend to use tools used by others. So I think there's a lot of work we can do even without AI and ML with respect to automating some of the things that they usually do, providing them more visualization of data so that they can do things faster rather than using scratch pads and making notes here and there, and also understanding their workflows and simplifying that. Because I think once you start with that, then you can start augmenting with more AI and ML and simplifying data for them so that they can become more efficient. So that's where I have been focused. Stairwell, when it comes to threat hunting, we specifically focus on malware threat hunting. And I do actually run a team of people who provide malware threat hunting services to our customers. And a lot of feedback from them tends to be very simple. They're not asking for stars in the sky. They're asking for very simple things that we haven't thought of, because a lot of our products have been focused on incident responders or people who are sitting in SOC and dealing with alerts and things like that. So that's a good starting point for me. And then over time, we can add more complexity, more AI and machine learning augmented threat hunting workflows.
That's great, thank you. And one of the things, Paul, I want to touch on something you said earlier is like a lot of what we're doing here and talking about, right? Like the tools and the people and the technologies all combined is very expensive. It costs a lot, even for the CISO with the largest budget, right? Like to bring all of us together underneath their tech stack is super expensive. But that collaboration and mission focus, that we've referenced here today, right, can start with a community. And we all have community aspects to our platform, as well as like the network, right? Like we're all going to RSA conference here in a couple weeks, and then we'll be at Black Hat, and then we'll be at other industry conferences. The importance of community coming together to collaborate, not just a network, but right, like to proactively share, intelligence and data, before and during and post incident. I'll leave it open, for round robin discussion here, just on the importance of community in general, and what is your definition of community as it is important to you as a leader and a practitioner?
Sure. So you picked on me first, so I guess I'll start. But I know the other guys have some thoughts on this as well. But like I said earlier, the high tide rises all ships. And if we're looking at this, like there's a global problem to solve, we all ultimately have to work together. And that's sort of the foundational element of community to us, whether that means our tools interoperate or we share intelligence. And I think the sharing of intelligence is one of the most important things. As an intelligence junkie, when I read a report that dissects an incident, that organization could have kept that private, but when that information is shared, I think everybody benefits from that. And I think that's really what we've all got to be focused on, is helping each other solve this hard problem, be it through technology or expertise. For us, we have a community edition, which is free and will always be free. Anybody can log into it. It includes thousands of content objects, including threat intelligence, much of which we get from our friends at Mandiant. And then it also includes an attack library, which is really helpful for the blue teamer who's never done offensive research to better understand a given threat. So basically, we let you shoulder surf over the red teamer and look at like a ransomware detonation or an entire kill chain end to end, or a very specific threat, like a privilege escalation or something like that. So you can actually visually see what happens from the bad guy's perspective and the victim's perspective, and that really will help you. Again, it's free. You're able to take a look at it as much as you want. The corollary to that is the detection content. We integrate with a lot of open source projects like Sigma and Atomic Red and others out there like that to provide sort of an enrichment of how detection content might work when actually fielded out in the real world, and regardless of what your detection tooling actually is. So that will always be free. It will continue to be added to, and again, it's under the spirit of the high tide rises all ships. We have tons of students that use the platform, which I think is great. The next generation of cyber talent has got to be an area of focus for any security leader. I know also we have competitors that use our community platform, which I find to be pretty funny. But one way or another, it's important to us, and I think I'm sure important to the rest of these guys too.
Yeah, Paul, we're in exactly the same boat. At least a dozen competitors use our open source software, and that's fine, actually. Community is so near and dear to my heart, maybe in part because I spent so much time in the culture of open science, but open source sort of is closely related to that. I think it's worth noting that community and security don't always go well together structurally, because some defenders are understandably reluctant to share. So we're overcoming some activation energy when we ask people to come together. And because no one wants to be seen as naive or compromising their organization. And I think a good way to overcome this dynamic is through open source institutions. Open source is just, in my view, a real force for good in the world. It focuses people on common problems. One underappreciated aspect of open source is it provides career mobility for folks with that didn't have the advantage of a fancy education to learn about tooling that is really cutting edge, to make contributions to it, that don't require buying a license commercially or getting a job in some company that can afford black box or bespoke commercial tooling. And I think that can really leapfrog careers and is worth talking and thinking about. And it also provides maybe not de jure standards, but de facto standards that are really useful in a crisis. And a couple of us have mentioned SolarWinds, but I'll give you my own spin on that. Mandiant was incredibly courageous. The company released indicators very rapidly in well-accepted open source formats, almost within hours, I think, of understanding the mechanism of the breach. And as Melissa referenced, open source tooling, including Zeek, the software that our founders invented and we're commercializing, those data sources were critical in understanding that mechanism. But then Mandiant turned around and made a gift to the whole world. And companies that had adopted those standards, and they include, Snorts, Rakata, Zeek, Yara, other standards as well, they were able to get that insight from Mandiant into their customers' hands and produce defensive benefit for the world really quickly. There were sort of two kinds of companies there, those that could do that and those that couldn't. And so to me, that's such a good example of the power of communal defense. But it does take leadership. So we appreciate the leadership of Mandiant in that instance. I'll stop. I have a lot to say about community.
Yeah, I think as vendors, we tend to compete against each other for budget and attention and other things. But at the same time, and it's a good thing because it pushes us to be better, deliver better quality products and so on. But there are a lot of areas where we can collaborate, some of which you have highlighted. Some of the other things we can look at are things like, education, cybersecurity education, educating our customer base or, people who would benefit from it. That's an area we can collaborate on. There's no competition in that. Sharing information, you already mentioned Mandiant does a great job of publishing information on their blogs and, to community so that we can all be better for it. So, yeah, I think there are areas that we can all work together and make cybersecurity better. Some of the things would be, so vendors are incentivized in some ways to share information so that, they can get better branding, but at the same time, maybe creating an incentive structure for our customers to share information with others. Sometimes they tend to be very conservative in letting this information out. So that would be something we should look at, how can they share this information responsibly so that it makes everybody better without disclosing private information of their customers and so on.
You touch on a good point, which is there's two tiers to community, right? And I don't mean like ranked, but there's us, the vendors that need the community, the community of vendors, and then there's our users and our customers, which are ultimately most of the time the victims. And I think for the first part, the community, it's at the end of the day forgetting the competition for the time and the budget and all of that, and understanding at the end of the day, those are our clients, right? And we've been tasked we've told them we would protect them and help them through this, and that's what's got to be done, regardless of whose name goes on the letterhead.
Yeah, a lot on this front relates to Nozomi Networks as well, and I mentioned earlier our involvement with OTCC and other communities similar. ISA that again relate to OT specifically. We have been working with Mandiant and many others in terms of intelligence sharing and joint security research that is getting ahead of the vulnerabilities that might otherwise be discovered in the wild. And we are very proud to be contributors to the CVE databases and, again, mostly that relate to OT. But Greg mentioned, a very important aspect that our leadership has latched onto, which is open source. And I will encourage for the community watching this to stay tuned for some interesting announcements that will be related to open source and community sharing of intelligence surrounding the frontier between IT and OT and specifically related to OT for the most part. But I think having a community that can come together, and this is a community of competitors in the case of OTCC as an example, who can, come together for the clients, as Lucas pointed out, is paramount. And like I said, at Nozomi, and I think it's the same with Mandiant and many of the companies here, as Lucas mentioned, and Corelight and Stairwell, is that having the leadership come forward with that outreach and, kind of the interest to work together on behalf of our clients, on behalf of the end users who are subject to these attacks and subject to these vulnerabilities is paramount. And again, I'm proud to say that Nozomi Networks is a leader on that front, particularly as it relates to the industrial and IoT sector.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned it here, like the criticality of not just the sharing and collaboration from a community aspect and a mission aspect is the importance of those whom we're working with and supporting on the client standpoint. Like the integration of internal data sets are very powerful for how we respond to breaches and incidents, right? And just the ongoing support of anything related to critical infrastructure and how we would threat hunt against that. And just the value of community there, right? It's not just us here on this panel as, quote unquote vendor organizations. It's those that we support from an industry and customer perspective. And, we are getting short on time, but, as a mom and somebody in cybersecurity for, gosh, a very long time now. I pause there because I feel dated and old. One of the things I look at and I talk to my family and those around me about is what's the most daunting, scaring thing that we're looking at right now. The upcoming election, at least from a domestic standpoint, a lot of volatility and kind of verbose opinions around the TikTok bans. But, just as being a Google employee now, the value and the competitiveness of artificial intelligence. I think we all have a lot of opinions, but, it would be great to round out today's discussion as we look forward to other thought panels moving throughout the rest of the year, just on how you guys want to close things out. Shell, how about you?
Yeah, I can start. So, it's hard to predict what would be most consequential, but definitely, looking at supply chain attacks, how they have been increasing over time and how they provide a way to attack a pretty wide base of organizations. I think that's probably going to be, in the headlines for upcoming year for sure. I mean, the thing that worries me most is AI, and especially, with the generative AI, its ability to create, your style, your likeness, your voice, etc. I think, the Nigerian email attacks that we are all familiar with, they are going to become very, very realistic, and things like that could cause a crisis of trust on the internet, because what can you trust if everything is generated correct to the T? How would you know what is right, what is wrong? So yeah, I mean, these are some other things that we need to look at just from enterprise perspective, supply chain, in general, internet security. It's the AI that poses a major threat in upcoming year.
I would definitely agree with that, Shell. I think the generative AI has such an ability to, facilitate disinformation campaigns like we've never seen before, above and beyond just the, the phishing attacks or those maybe, individual compromise or individual attacks, but thinking more globally, that scares me for sure. And I think, Mel, you've mentioned election security. That came up on a conversation with a customer a couple of days ago. I believe it was actually with Mandiant as well, where certainly the government's very focused on that. And if you think about the interplay between the cybersecurity resiliency of our election systems, coupled with potential disinformation campaigns facilitated by AI, scares the hell out of me. I'm not really sure what the solution for that is. But I'm sure the best minds are working on it, or at least I hope so.
Yeah, we talked about AI in terms of defense and machine learning, in the case of Nozomi and others. But I would absolutely say AI is the biggest threat. I mean, I'll just pile onto this thread is that I think the use of AI, by attackers, by nefarious actors, is I think by far the biggest threat that we face, you know, in the cybersecurity community. So.
And it's twofold, because it's not just in the sophistication of the attack, it's how many can have it, like, can now do it, right? It writes code, it does everything. So it can write emails, it can write code, it could supply itself, you know, in theory, it could do the entire cycle. That's probably the big umbrella that anything that we say here is going to fall under. I think that mixed in with everything that we're already focused on, there's a reason that all of the topics we've spoken about today were the topics that we spoke about, right? These were the things those were all the weaknesses that we all saw and that we started to tackle and everything else. And they continue to be the threat. They're also going to continue to be the solution. The continuing sharing of information, the continuing integration, so that regardless of what my product covers, I can integrate with this product and get more there, get more out of it. It's going to be doing more due diligence. You know, the old adage in cybersecurity, I say old adage for an industry this young, but it is the old adage, which is they only have to get it right once. We've got to continuously be right. And that's going to be the persistence, I think, is running out of steam. It could be a huge threat, but it's running out of steam under the umbrella of this AI that can be relentless.
I might have a slight variant to that. I mean, I agree with the general tone of vigilance here around AI. It seems like most technical innovations, it's a classic double-edged sword, but just both edges are very sharp. But AI itself wouldn't be the threat. I think it's the underlying conflicts and criminal business models that would drive misappropriation of it. And so, you know, I would just call attention to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and further escalations in global conflict that may be brewing. Those could have the potential to weaponize AI in a way that's quite, you know, fearsome and really challenge defenders all around the world. But constitutionally, I'm an optimist, and I think that we'll rise to the challenge. And I would say in another realm, like in the realm of human rights, where there's a lot of concern about generative AI and its impact on providing testimony, visual testimony, there's a great nonprofit called Witness you can learn about. They've done a lot of work in thinking about how to create the notion of verified evidence. And I think in this world, normalized and verified evidence, recommitting to that idea becomes pretty important, both in cybersecurity, but also in defending civil society, which is why cybersecurity is interesting in the first place. It's not inherently interesting. It's interesting because we have commitments to institutions that we believe in and want to defend, and evidence is just a critical component of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to close things out, Greg. Like, you know, everything what we're doing here, talking about it, we feel directly related to our industry or our use case, right? But warfare has progressed over the past how many hundreds of years to be from like physical and militant to now those that we are fighting from a cyber perspective, and from just a greater good conversation and the protection against these brazen threat actors. And Paul, you mentioned it earlier, like the confidence behind like generative AI is the same confidence that we, you know, battle from a deep dark web perspective with these threat actors and nation states that, you know, target us at the most critical moments and make us vulnerable as consumers and users and practitioners. Thank you, everybody, today. Like, this has been valuable. Again, I love to talk with my friends, right? My friends are my partners and those that make us better together and stronger together. Going into key events like we have coming up at RSA. We lost out on the opportunity to be face-to-face for a long period of time, and for those coming back in person with us. At RSA 2023, wow, kind of a time warp there that some of us haven't been together since 2020. We'd love to host you. My favorite things are to see people in person. Granted, you can't see me on camera today, but I will be the most obnoxiously overdressed person at these events. Our friends at SnapAttack alongside SCV Ventures will be hosting the Dry Powder Happy Hour to kick things off on Monday. And then my favorite events to host all year are the infamous Mandiant Taco Tuesday alongside everybody else here. It's a party, it's fun. Come and, you know, share a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, a cocktail, and a taco with us Tuesday at the Spur. And, you know, get down and dirty with our practitioner friends with a CTF event at the Dark Arts Village, excuse me. And then Mandiant Wind Down Wednesday, again, with all of our partners and our friends. It is what it is. Let's wind down, celebrate what we've collaborated with, at the week at RSA, and have a glass of wine. Fine tasting Sonoma sommelier comes in. We will treat you. We will make it right. And, again, wish everybody well as they depart back home on Thursday, the 27th. Those are a lot of words. We will make sure that you have a follow-up email with these details for the events alongside a survey. Give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to meet you. And we really do hope that you will meet us in person and be part of future panels and collaboration moving forward. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Thanks, friends.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate you guys. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.